The kid's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the microphone. Tommy Castellano, 17 years old, stood center stage at the Sands Hotel Copa Room, frozen under lights so bright they felt like the sun had fallen on top of him. 500 people in tuxedos and evening gowns stared at him. The 12-piece orchestra waited. And Dean Martin, the king of cool himself, stood 3 feet away with an encouraging smile that somehow made everything worse. Tommy's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The silence stretched from uncomfortable to excruciating. Someone in the third row coughed. Tommy could feel sweat running down his back, soaking into the cheap suit his mother had bought him at J.C. Penney's. The microphone felt like it weighed 50 pounds, and then Dean Martin did something nobody expected. He waved his hand at the conductor. The orchestra fell silent. He walked over to Tommy and put his arm around the kid's shoulders. The entire room held its breath. And for the next 90 seconds, Dean Martin turned the spotlight into a private conversation that would change Tommy Castellano's life forever. But to understand what happened on that stage, you need to understand how a working-class kid from Henderson, Nevada, ended up standing next to the biggest star in Las Vegas on a Saturday night in August 1966. Tommy Castellano lived in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of Henderson, about 15 miles from the glittering Strip. His father, Sal, worked as a mechanic at a truck depot. His mother, Marie, cleaned rooms at the Flamingo 3 days a week. They were good people, hard-working people, the kind of people who counted pennies and dreamed of their kids having something better. Tommy had something better, at least potentially. He had a voice, not a great voice, not the kind that made people weep or threw them to their feet in standing ovations, but a good voice. A warm, clear tenor that reminded people of early Frank Sinatra, back when Frank was still skinny and hungry. Tommy could carry a tune. He could make "Fly Me to the Moon" sound genuine instead of mechanical. And in Henderson, Nevada in 1966, that was enough to make people notice. He'd been singing at local church socials and community events since he was 14. Small stuff, tiny audiences, but he loved it. Loved the feeling of connecting with people through music. His parents encouraged him, even though they worried about the practicality of a singing career. His father would say, "Tommy, it's great you can sing, but maybe learn a trade too, just in case." Tommy understood, but he also understood that when he sang, he felt like he was supposed to be doing exactly that. Nothing else made sense in quite the same way. In July 1966, a local radio station, Kino, announced a talent contest. The prize? A chance to sing one song on stage with Dean Martin at the Sands Hotel during his regular Saturday night show. It was a publicity stunt, a way to create some buzz for both the radio station and the E.T.'s hotel. But for Tommy, it was everything. He auditioned with "That's Amore." He wasn't trying to impersonate Dean. He just sang it honestly, with all the joy and warmth he felt when he thought about the song. The judges, 3 minor DJs from Keno, were charmed. "Kid's got something," one of them said. "Not polish, but something." Tommy won. When the notification came, Marie Castellano cried. Sal bought a bottle of cheap champagne and they toasted their son in the cramped kitchen. "My boy's gonna sing with Dean Martin," Sal kept saying, shaking his head in disbelief. Dean Martin. But as the date approached, Tommy's excitement curdled into terror. What had seemed like a dream started to feel like a nightmare. He'd be singing in front of high rollers, celebrities, people who'd seen the best performers in the world. He'd be on a stage that Sinatra had played, that Sammy Davis Jr. had owned, that Dean Martin commanded every single night. And Tommy? Tommy was just a kid from Henderson in a cheap suit. The week before the show, Tommy barely slept. He practiced constantly, singing in his bedroom, in the shower, walking to and from the bus stop where he worked part-time. He obsessed over every note, every phrase, every breath. His mother noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Tommy, honey, you need to rest. You'll be great." But Tommy knew better. He wouldn't be great. He'd be adequate at best. And adequate wasn't enough, not on that stage. On August 13th, 1966, Tommy and his parents arrived at the Sands Hotel at 7:00 p.m. The show started at 9:00. Tommy was supposed to meet with Dean's people backstage at 7:30 to go over the logistics. As they walked through the casino, Tommy felt like he was entering another world. Everything was red velvet and gold trim and crystal chandeliers. Women in evening gowns glided past. Men in tuxedos smoked cigars and laughed. The air smelled like expensive perfume and money. Tommy's suit suddenly felt even cheaper. Backstage, a thin man in horn-rimmed glasses introduced himself as Eddie Marsh, Dean's road manager. "All right, kid, here's how it's going to work," Eddie said, looking at a clipboard. "Dean will do his first set, about 45 minutes. Then he'll introduce you. You'll come out, shake his hand, and you'll sing Volare together. He'll take the first verse, you'll take the second, you'll harmonize on the chorus. Simple. The orchestra knows the arrangement. Just follow Dean's lead and you'll be fine." Tommy nodded. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Does Mr. Martin want to rehearse with me or anything?" Eddie laughed. "Kid, Dean doesn't rehearse, he just does it. Don't worry, he'll make you look good. That's what he does." Tommy's parents were escorted to a table near the back of the room. They'd been given complimentary seats, a nice touch from the hotel. Tommy was taken to a small dressing room where he was supposed to wait until his cue. There was a mirror, a couch, a bottle of water. He sat on the couch and stared at himself in the mirror. He looked terrified. At 9 p.m., Tommy heard the crowd roar as Dean Martin took the stage. Even through the closed door, he could hear Dean's voice, smooth and effortless, starting with, "Ain't that a kick in the head?" The audience loved him. Of course they did. Dean Martin was magic. And Tommy? Tommy was about to ruin that magic. He tried to calm himself. He did breathing exercises his mother had shown him. He paced the small room. He hummed quietly, trying to warm up his voice, but nothing helped. The terror was building, rising like floodwater, threatening to drown him. At 9:43 p.m., Eddie Marsh knocked on the door. "You're up in 2 minutes, kid. Come on." Tommy stood on shaking legs and followed Eddie through the backstage corridors. The sound of Dean's voice and the orchestra grew louder. They reached the wings, stage left. Tommy could see Dean on stage, bathed in spotlight, finishing "Everybody Loves Somebody." The audience was clapping along. Eddie put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "When Dean calls you out, walk straight to center stage. Don't rush, smile, shake his hand. Then just sing. You got this." Tommy didn't got this. Tommy was about to vomit. Dean finished the song to thunderous applause. He took a bow, then turned to the microphone. Thank you. You're too kind. Now, folks, we've got something special for you tonight. My friends at Kano Radio held a contest to find Las Vegas's next singing star, and the winner is here tonight, a young man named Tommy Castellano from Henderson. Tommy, come on out here." The spotlight swung to stage left. Eddie gave Tommy a little push. Tommy walked out into the light. The applause was polite, encouraging. Tommy could see his parents at their table, his mother with her hands clasped together like she was praying. He walked to center stage. Dean was smiling at him, that famous, relaxed smile. Dean extended his hand. Tommy shook it. Dean's hand was warm, steady. "How you doing, kid?" "Good, Mr. Martin. Thank you for this." "Please, call me Dean. What are we singing?" "Volare." "Volare. Great choice." Dean turned to the audience. "This kid's got taste, folks. All right, Tommy, you ready?" No, Tommy wasn't ready. Tommy would never be ready. But he nodded. The orchestra started the introduction. The familiar melody filled the Copa room. Dean started singing the first verse in Italian, his voice effortless and rich. The audience swayed. Dean was doing what he always did, making it look easy. Then the first verse ended. Tommy's verse was coming. The orchestra hit the transition. This was his moment. Tommy opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His mind went completely blank. He knew the words. He'd sung this song 100 times, but standing there, under those lights with 500 people watching, with Dean Martin 3 feet away, the words vanished from his brain like water through a sieve. The orchestra kept playing, 1 bar, 2 bars. The pianist looked confused. The conductor glanced at Dean. Tommy tried again. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His throat had closed. His hands were shaking so badly the microphone was vibrating. The room was silent except for the orchestra, which was starting to falter, unsure whether to keep going or stop. Someone in the audience whispered. Tommy heard it, a woman's voice. "Oh, the poor kid." That's when Tommy knew he'd failed. This moment, this one shot at something special, was turning into public humiliation. His parents were watching, hundreds of people were watching, and he was standing there like an idiot, frozen, unable to do the one thing he'd come to do. He wanted to run. Just drop the microphone and run off stage and keep running until he was back in Henderson where he belonged. And then Dean Martin raised his hand. The conductor saw it and cut the orchestra off mid-phrase. The music stopped. The room fell silent. 500 people waited to see what would happen next. Dean walked over to Tommy. He put his arm around the kid's shoulders and gently guided him a few steps away from the standing microphones. Dean's own microphone was in his other hand. He held it down by his side, not speaking to the audience. He was just talking to Tommy, low and quiet, so only the kid could hear. "Hey, Tommy, look at me." Tommy looked up. Dean's face was kind. No judgment, no frustration, just kindness. "You scared?" Dean asked. Tommy nodded. His eyes were burning with tears he was desperately trying to hold back. "That's okay. You know what? I'm going to tell you something true. First time I sang in public, I was 14 years old. It was at my uncle's restaurant in Steubenville. I was supposed to sing O Sol Mio. You know what happened?" Tommy shook his head. "I threw up, right there on stage, in front of maybe 40 people, and I ran off crying." Dean smiled. "My father found me in the alley behind the restaurant. You know what he told me?" "What?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. He said, "Dino, being scared doesn't make you a coward. Running away doesn't even make you a coward. The only thing that makes you a coward is never trying again." Then he took me back inside and made me sing the song. I was shaking. I was crying. But I sang it. And you know what? It was terrible. I forgot half the words. But I finished it. Dean squeezed Tommy's shoulder. "The people who matter aren't the ones who judge you for being scared. They're the ones who see you fight through it. And Tommy, everyone in this room right now is rooting for you. They're not hoping you fail. They're hoping you succeed. Including me." Tommy took a shaky breath. "I don't think I can. That's fear talking, and fear is a liar." Dean looked directly into Tommy's eyes. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start the song over. This time, I'm going to sing it with you. Not a duet. Just us, singing together, like we're friends at a bar having fun. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave enough to open your mouth. Can you do that?" Tommy thought about his parents sitting out there, about his mother who cleaned hotel rooms so he could have a better life, about his father who counted pennies so Tommy could have that cheap suit, about all the times he'd sung in his bedroom, dreaming of a moment like this. "I can try," Tommy said. Dean smiled. "That's all any of us can do, kid." Then Dean leaned in close and whispered something that only Tommy heard. 8 words, simple words, but they were the words Tommy would carry with him for the rest of his life. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's singing anyway. Dean stepped back and nodded to the conductor. "Let's take it from the top, boys. And this time, Tommy and I are singing together. All right, Tommy?" Tommy nodded. He gripped his microphone. His hands were still shaking, but less now. The orchestra started again. The familiar intro filled the room. Dean started singing, but this time he was looking at Tommy, singing to him as much as to the audience. And when Tommy's part came, Dean didn't step back. He stayed close, singing along quietly, his voice underneath Tommy's, supporting him. Tommy opened his mouth, and this time, the words came out. His voice cracked on the first word, but he kept going. "Nel blu di pinto di blu." Dean smiled at him, encouraging. "Felice di stare lassù." Tommy's voice got stronger. Dean harmonized, his richer voice blending with Tommy's, making the kid sound better than he was. By the chorus, Tommy was actually singing, really singing, not perfectly. His voice still shook. He missed a few notes, but he was doing it. He was standing on that stage in front of 500 people, and he was singing with Dean Martin. The audience could feel it. The tension that had filled the room transformed into something else, something beautiful. They started to applaud, not just politely, but genuinely, moved by what they were watching. This wasn't a publicity stunt anymore. It was a moment of human courage. A kid facing his fear with one of the greatest entertainers in the world standing beside him, literally and figuratively. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. People stood. Tommy's mother was crying, her hands covering her mouth. His father was clapping so hard his hands hurt. Dean pulled Tommy into a hug. "You did it, kid," he said into Tommy's ear. "You did it." Tommy was crying now, but they were good tears, relief, joy, disbelief. Dean held up Tommy's hand like a boxing referee declaring a winner. The crowd roared. When Tommy finally walked off stage, his legs barely held him up. Eddie Marsh was waiting in the wings, grinning. Kid, that was something else. That was really something. Tommy's parents were allowed backstage to see him. His mother hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. His father kept saying, "You did good, Tommy. You did real good." After they left, after the show was over and the crowd had gone home, Tommy sat alone in the small dressing room. There was a knock on the door. It was Dean Martin. "Mind if I come in?" Dean asked. "Of course, Mr. Martin, please." Dean sat down on the couch. He'd changed out of his tuxedo into slacks and a casual shirt. He looked like a regular person, not a legend. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," Dean said. "I am, thank you. I don't know what to say. You saved me out there." Dean shook his head. "No, I didn't. You saved yourself. I just stood next to you while you did it." "Those words you said to me," Tommy started. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's singing anyway. Did your father really say that to you?" Dean smiled. "No, I made that up just now. But it's true anyway, isn't it?" Tommy laughed, despite everything. Yeah, it is." Dean stood up. "Tommy, can I give you some advice? Not as a singer to a singer, but as a guy who's been around to a guy who's just starting? Please. You're going to have a lot of moments in your life where you're scared, where you feel like you can't do something. When that happens, remember tonight, not the part where you froze, the part where you unfroze. That's who you really are, not the fear, the courage to move through it." Dean extended his hand. Tommy shook it. "You take care of yourself, kid, and keep singing." Tommy Castellano never became famous. He didn't get a record deal or star in movies or perform on the Strip. He went on to have a perfectly ordinary life. He worked as a music teacher at Henderson High School for 35 years. He married a woman named Linda who played piano. They had 3 kids. He sang in the church choir and at local events, but every year on August 13th, he would take out the newspaper clipping from that night. There was a small photo of him on stage with Dean Martin. The headline read, "Local teen gets chance of a lifetime at the Sands." And when his students would get nervous before recitals, when they'd freeze up during performances, Tommy would sit with them and tell them about the night he sang with Dean Martin, about how he froze in front of 500 people, about how the king of cool walked over and made him feel like the most important person in the room. And then he'd tell them what Dean had whispered to him. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's singing anyway. Over the decades, Tommy taught thousands of students, and every single one of them heard that story. Some of them went on to have music careers, most of them didn't, but all of them remembered the lesson. When Tommy died in 2019 at the age of 70, his funeral was packed. Former students came from across the country to pay their respects. They stood up one by one and told stories about how Mr. Castellano had helped them face their fears, how he'd encouraged them when they wanted to quit, how he'd taught them that courage wasn't about being unafraid. His daughter Angela gave the eulogy. She told the story of that night at the Sands. She told it the way her father had told it to her 100 times. And at the end she said, "My father always said that Dean Martin gave him 2 gifts that night. The first was teaching him how to be brave. The second was teaching him that the greatest thing you can do in life is help someone else be brave. The thing about kindness is that it multiplies." Dean Martin spent 90 seconds talking to a scared kid in August 1966. Just 90 seconds. But those 90 seconds rippled outward. They touched Tommy Castellano, who touched thousands of students, who touched their own children and students and the people they met along the way. Dean Martin probably didn't remember Tommy Castellano's name a week after that show. He did publicity stunts like that regularly. It was part of the job, part of the image. But for Tommy, it was everything. And for thousands of people who never met Dean Martin, who never saw him perform, his kindness still touched their lives through the man he took 90 seconds to save on a Saturday night. That's the real legacy of that moment, not the singing, not the applause, but the whispered words and the arm around the shoulder and the choice to turn humiliation into triumph. We all have those moments. Moments when we could walk away or we could choose compassion, when we could let someone fail or we could stand beside them while they find their courage. Dean Martin chose compassion. And somewhere, in ways we'll never fully know, the world is better for it.